This is the Oral History Program again. I'm Ray Mofield, and we're visiting today with W.H. Tanner, William Henry Tanner, Jr., I believe it is, but known to his friends as Bill Tanner. He lives on Marywood Drive, and he's a retired groceryman here in Marshall County. He was not born in the county, but he's been here an awful long time, I believe 33 years or so. It's a pleasure to be visiting on the radio with you, and we want to start off and ask you where you were born, Bill.
I was born in Sykeston, Missouri on April 24th, 1911.
Well, you have a rather noted name. Tanners have been important in American history for a good while. Could you tell us your mom and dad?
Well, my father was William H. Tanner Sr., and my mother was Rivers Clore, the daughter of David H. Clore and Sally Newton. Sally Newton was from Hickman and Fulton County, and my grandfather was from O'Brien County, Tennessee, and my mother was raised on Reelfoot Lake when she was a small girl. And
now your great-grandfather, was that the captain in the Civil War?
No, my grandfather was a captain in the Civil War on the northern side.
Mm-hmm.
And my great-grandfather was born in Livingston County in 1810 and migrated
Did you know that when you came to Marshall County to?
No, I really didn't know for sure where Lewis Hatcher Tanner came from. And I dug that up over Livingston County Courthouse, that he was born in Livingston County. At that time, when he was born, why, Livingston County comprised of Lyon County and Caldwell County were Livingston County.
Mm-hmm.
And we, of course, but we think that he was born around Skin Frame Creek in Livingston County, which would be close to Eddyville, but that again we're not sure about.
Mm-hmm.
And my great-great-grandfather, Lewis Hatcher Tanner, migrated to southeast Missouri before the Civil War, and he established the town of New Hamburg, Missouri. Mm-hmm. And then my grandfather, of course, was raised over there, and he was active in the Civil War as a captain in the Scouts on the northern side.
Well, all that's very interesting. I suppose the Tanners came to America, to Virginia first.
Yes, they came to Norfolk, Virginia, and there was they were there, and they lived on what originally was Tanner's Creek and on Elizabeth River at Norfolk, and then there was a Tanner's Point there that they were, and then they gradually, some of them gradually moved westward, and they moved up into Mecklenburg County, Virginia, and then they migrated to the Carolina lines between the two states, and then they migrated to Kentucky, along, not with, but about the same time of Daniel Boone, and they used Daniel Boone's route. That was the route of travel from the East Coast to this area, and they ended up in Oldham County, and then it worked down the Ohio River, and that's how they got to Smithland and Golconda.
If you went back far enough, I guess you'd find the Tanners, coming into England in 1066 with William the Conqueror?
Yes, they came from France. The original Tanners came to England from France. And in France, they spell the name Tanneur, Tanneur.
Which meant tanner.
And when I was in World War II, I was stationed in Normandy, and that's where the tanneurs came from. And some of those tanneurs found out that that there was a tanner from the United States in St. Quentin, where I was in France,
Yeah.
and they came to see me. They wanted to talk to me, but they hadn't had any contact with the tanners since William the Conqueror, but they just wanted to see me, and of course I wanted to see them too. And they were farmers there in Normandy.
All right, now you grew up in Sikeston. What did your dad do?
My father was a farmer, and he was in the real estate business. He and his partner Dan McCoy practically made the city of Sikeston through McCoy and Tanner subdivisions, and then my grandfather subdivided a lot of it. And a lot of Sikeston is Tanner subdivisions. There's a Tanner Street in Sikeston, and then there's also a William Street there named after me. In other words, the south end of Sikeston was practically a Tanner subdivision. And Dan McCoy had a daughter named Ruth and a daughter named Dorothy and a son named Ruskin and a son named Daniel. And we had a Daniel, Ruskin, Ruth, and Dorothy Street. And then I was the only one we had, and then we had a William Street named after me. It was right next to Murray Lane there in Sikeston.
So that is a rather wealthy family, actually.
Well, I suppose so.
Did you go to high school in Sikeston?
I graduated from high school in Sikeston in 1928.
Now, what did you first begin to do?
Well,
were you a real estate operator also?
Well, after I graduated from high school, I went to college, to Central College at Fayette, Missouri, which is known now as Central Methodist College.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to school there 2 years. And my father, at that time, was postmaster in Sikeston. And he died in 1929. And right in the middle of the Depression, and of course being a farmer, why, we were in pretty hard circumstances, and a man's estate has to be settled up when he dies, and nothing, you couldn't sell anything because nobody had any money to buy anything, and we lost everything. It wiped us out financially, and my mother and sister and I had a pretty hard time getting by. Mm-hmm. And then I started to Washington University at St. Louis, but I ran out of money and I didn't have enough fortitude to go ahead and make it one way or another without any money, and that was the end of my college education. And then I did whatever I could. I worked in a flour mill there at Sikeston for a while. I worked when I first went to work, I worked for 20...
would have been Scott County Milling Company, maybe?
That was the Scott County Milling Company. My grandfather built the mill for the Bowmans, and my uncle was the treasurer of Scott County Milling Company, and anyway, I got a job in the mill, paid 25 cents an hour. Now, that's hard to believe, but that's right. I got to work 8 hours a day and about 40 hours a week for 25 cents an hour. And then when Roosevelt put the NRA in, I got raised to 40 cents an hour.
Well, that sounds like big money to me.
I worked there in the mill, but that kind of work didn't appeal to me a whole lot, and I wasn't very good help. And I got fired because I wasn't attentive enough to my job. And
Well, that taught you something, though, I suppose.
well, I don't know whether it taught me very much or not, but so I horsed around and I finally got a job in St. Louis with Belair and Spies as a detail man selling dainty flour for them, and I'd always wanted to be a salesman, and I couldn't. I was desperate. I couldn't get a job. Well, I had worked for the Missouri State Warehouse Department, the grain inspection department, and I had sample grain at the Belair and Spies in St. Louis, and I knew you bought the best quality of wheat you could buy, and so when I got entirely desperate for a job after I got laid off from the Missouri State Grain Inspection Department, I went back to Missouri, but then I came back to St. Louis, and I thought I would see Belair and Spies and see if they had a job selling that I might do something about. And I went to their office, and they had a girl on the desk there, which a company do at the information desk. And I asked that girl, she said, "Who do you want to see?" Well, I said, "I would like to talk to your sales manager." Well, she said, "Tell me about it." I said, "Well, I didn't come to see you." I said, "I want to see him." And I said, "You tell him that I'm here and that I want to talk to him, and then let him decide whether I'm going to see him or not." And she did, and she was a little surprised, and she said, "Well, he will see you." And when I went in there, he laughed. He said, "I've got that girl paid to keep people like you from bothering me." But he said, "I was just a little bit intrigued. I wanted to see what you look like. I thought maybe if you had enough nerve to get in here to see me, that you might be a pretty good salesman." And so we got talking one thing another, and sure enough, he hired me. Mm-hmm. And he sent me down in Tennessee to do detail work, and I worked for them until their advertising budget run out, and they called me back to St. Louis, and they said, "We don't have any money again, but said we'll give you a job selling in St. Louis." And I said, "Well, I'm not interested in living in St. Louis, and I don't want a job there, and I need." Well, he said, "We have an employment agency that gets jobs for us when we want to," and said, "We'll just tell them to get you a job somewhere else." And that was in the middle of the Depression, boy, when you couldn't hardly get a job. Mm-hmm. And so I went down to this employment, and I ended up with a choice of several jobs. Of course, I had some pull from Belair and Spies, which was, at that time, was Flour Mills of America. And Carnation Milk Company offered me a job in West Kentucky and Southeast Missouri, but they wanted me to live in Paducah or Cairo, Illinois. And I didn't want my family to live in Cairo or Paducah. So I didn't take that job, and I took a job with Saxony Mills in St. Louis. And I worked the southern part of the United States for them. And then Jefferson Island Salt Company offered me a job when their salesman in that area quit, and I took a job with Jefferson Island. They were a Louisville concern, and they were the largest independent salt company in the business, and third largest salt company, period. Mm-hmm. And we were supposed to have more money than all the rest of salt companies put together. They handled a mine in Jefferson Island, Louisiana, with Teletype from Louisville, and they got that mine in Louisiana. The great actor Joseph Jefferson, who was in New York City stage, died, and that was his estate. And the Jones and Baylesses from Louisville bought it as a hunting preserve. That's where Teddy Roosevelt went bear hunting whenever he was. And so when they drilled for drinking water for the hunting lodge there around New Iberia, Louisiana, they hit this salt dome. And they decided to go in the salt business. The prohibition was on, and Frankfurt Distillery was shut down, Brown and Forman, and so they thought they would try the salt business. And
they did well, didn't they?
Well, it wasn't. You didn't get rich traveling on the road, but you were able to eat. And I traveled with them, and
Did that take you up to about World War II?
on through World War II. I went back to work for them after I came back from overseas.
I heard you say a moment ago that you'd been in overseas. Had you married by then?
Oh yeah, I had 2 children when I was gone overseas.
Well, tell us about your wife. Her name is...
Mabel Elizabeth Burns.
And you met her where?
I met her at Charleston. Saxon boys all married Charleston girls, and the Charleston boys, a lot of them married Saxon girls. They're only 14 miles apart, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of interchange between Saxon and Charleston. They're great rivals.
All right, you say, but then you had a couple of children. Now, how many do you have altogether now?
Well, I have 3 sons, and we'd had a daughter that we lost. Our first child was a daughter, but we lost her with lobar pneumonia in Memphis before they had antibiotic drugs like we do now.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's see. Robert lives where?
My youngest son, Robert, is in Dallas. At the present time, he's out of a job. He's looking for a job. He's a petroleum land management man, and the oil industry is sick right now, and he was with Texas Oil and Gas, and they were merged with the United States Steel, and Texas Oil and Gas had 3,000 employees, and U.S. Steel fired 1,500 of them, and Bob was only had 14 months seniority, and people with 5 and 10 years seniority lost their job.
Yeah.
But that wasn't all. Shell's laid off 15,000. Exxon laid off 30,000. All of the oil exploration and drilling right now there's nothing going on. In other words, when oil gets below a certain period, the dollars and cents, they can't afford to go for it.
Well, Texas is really suffering right now.
But it's like everything else. Because oil was so high, the submarginal operators were making it.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that's really, if our economy is healthy, the submarginal operators have to go. Mm-hmm. And of course, when the submarginal operators go, a lot of good operators go. And the oil industry right now is they're cutting their expenses, and they're settling down, and the inefficient operators will be eliminated. Yeah. But it may be 3 or 4 years before that comes.
That's a pretty good lecture in economic theory. Now, John is at the Bank of Benton.
Yes.
And Bill is?
He's a school teacher in Phoenix, Arizona. He teaches English in the high school.
Now, how many grandchildren do you have?
He has 4 children. He has 3 boys and a girl. And one of his oldest son just graduated from Arizona University at Tucson. His daughter is about to graduate from Arizona State University at Tempe. And his middle son, or one of his other son, is in the Coast Guard stationed at Portsmouth, Virginia. And his baby, his youngest son, graduates from high school this spring.
Does John have any children?
John's not married, and Bob's not married. Neither one of those 2 boys are married.
Now, all right, now then, I've got to get you in Marshall County. What in the world made you want to come here?
Well, I I had gotten in traveling to where I hated to leave home, and I had lost my enthusiasm, and I knew that you can't do your job unless you're enthusiastic about it, and I
Many a salesman has faced that era
and
situation, I
two,
guess.
I was afraid I would die in a hotel room somewhere by myself. And then when you'd come home, or the dog would bite you, they didn't know you, your children were growing up, and you had lost contact with them. And I wanted to find a job to where that I could be with my family. And I tried every way I could to line up something, and I didn't have any luck at all. Jobs are kind of hard to get for a 40-year-old man, and that's how old I was at that time. And so I had a very good friend who was sales manager for the IGA warehouse in Missouri over there, and who was responsible for West Kentucky also. And I had told him to look for a store that I could buy. I had a minimum amount of money that I could put into a store, and I had to try to buy one where I thought that I could succeed at, because my family was dependent on me to keep them eating.
And you're looking for a growth area, sort of, weren't you?
And I had to go the grocery store route because that was the only thing I knew anything about. And I thought maybe I could make a success of a grocery store. And so this friend of mine came up. He said, now there's a store over in West Kentucky that is an old gentleman runs, and it looked like that there might be a future there, and says, why don't you go over there and talk with him and look at the store? And so I did, and he said, if you do, we'll service you. And so I went over and talked to the man. The man was Clark Hunt here in Sikeston, Missouri. In Benton, Kentucky, C.C. Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And we negotiated, and eventually, after some negotiation, we made a deal, and I purchased his grocery store. He wanted to retire. He and his wife were becoming 65, and he wanted to rent his building and retire.
Is that the Midtown?
That's what at the present time is known as a Midtown ShopRite.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran that store until 1963. I ran it from 53 to 63. I ran it 10 years.
Did you introduce anything that was perhaps new to Marshall County at that time?
Well, my store was named Tanner IGA, as most of the people in Benton call it, and we could be credited, I think, with several firsts for Marshall County, not only Benton, but Marshall County. Unless I am wrong, I had the first complete self-service supermarket operation with national checkout cash registers and shopping carts and self-service store for the people to shop in. And I also had the first air-conditioned store in Marshall County. And then after that, in 63, Weatherall didn't want to service me because I didn't buy enough groceries. It was economical for them to deliver it. I had to have enough volume to handle a truckload. And so the only solution was to open a bigger store. And
is that when you built down on 12th Street?
Yes, and so they checked the possibilities for the store and made the traffic surveys, and we finally came up with the conclusion that the town could support the modern supermarket, and so we built that store here in Benton. And the funny thing about it, I wanted to when we built the store, we built the building, and then we sold the building to an investor. You don't own the real estate when you're in the supermarket business, because the life of a supermarket is about 10 years, or maybe 15, and the population moves and the store has to move, and so if you own the property, you're in the real estate business and the grocery business both, and that's a little bit. Even Kroger doesn't own their locations. They lease them because it's two different businesses. And anyway, we built this store, and then we sold it to an investor, and we built the first complete modern supermarket in Marshall County. And we had a store that was comparable to anything in St. Louis or Paducah or anything else. And we put it right here in Benton, and we bet on Benton growing enough to support that store, which it did.
Now, eventually then, you moved out into the shopping center on 641 South.
Well, we were forced to do that because the people who developed that shopping center had planned on a supermarket, and they went bankrupt. And we were afraid that chain store, somebody would come in and Benton would be over grocery stored for the amount of dollars and cents spent in Benton. And so they offered it to us, and we took the location in the shopping center and closed my other store, but of course the other store had been built 15 years. In other words, it had been built there, and we sold it to the county for a health center. I mean, the health department.
Yeah.
And then that store out there was equivalent to anything in Paducah.
You had a delicatessen in it?
We had a deli and a bakery, and it was the first deli bakery operation in Marshall County. And then I ran that store until 1976, and became 66 years old, and the grocery supermarket business is a little bit too fast for an aged man such as me, and my sons were not interested in the supermarket business, and they wouldn't want any part of it, and so I had to look for a buyer, and luckily I found a buyer.
Well, you provided a lot of services for Marshall Countyans, and I think they rewarded you by giving you a good business and so on. But I want to touch one more thing before we run out of time. We got about 3 more minutes. You were also civic-minded, and I'm thinking of the work you did in the Chamber of Commerce. Could you tell us a little about that area, some of the promotions?
Well, I was one of the people who helped to establish the Chamber of Commerce for Marshall County, and I also was one of the people who established the Fall Fishing Derby to try to help the tourist industry in the fall. In other words, in the summertime, the tourists are here, but we wanted to have a reason for them to come in, and the fall months is the most beautiful time of the year on Kentucky Lake anyway. And also, one of the things we did, we were the sponsor of the first local news broadcast program on WCBL when they first went in business in Marshall County.
I remember
and
that.
We maintained that local news up until the time I sold out in 1976. And it was just, I don't know, we were involved in progressive growth of Marshall County, and it was very interesting. The people in Marshall County are the salt of the earth.
Well, great.
This is
You're not sorry you came then.
No, this is the garden spot of the world. There's very few people, very few places that have as many attractive factors that people that live here do not realize how fortunate they are. the climate is ideal, and the people who live here are frugal, and they're just it's just a very. I'm proud to be a citizen of this area.
Well, that certainly is wonderful. You've given us a fine insight into your family history, your life, and your decision to come to Marshall County, and then the development of your supermarket idea, and of course some of idea of your civic work. I know if we told everything about you that it would take much more than 30 minutes. We appreciate you and thank you very much.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you, Ray, and I doubt if anybody would be very interested in what we talked about.